if you're going through a separation or divorce, especially in your 40s or 50s, you know that it is messy and it is challenging and triggering and going to pull up all the old wounds that you've had throughout your life. And the typical process is very legal and business, and it can be such a big leap from the intimacy and the love that you experienced with this person for maybe many, many years. And your body and your mind can really be freaking out, for lack of a better word, with this process and with this big jump. And there's so much there that can actually be addressed to help you move through this process with more grace, with more love, from a regulated and calm place, and help you get to that new, beautiful place that you're going. I had the most incredible conversation this week with Olivia Horoshko, AKA the Somatic Divorce Coach, all about how you can use somatic work, breath work, nervous system regulation to do just that, to help you explore your experience, what your body is dealing with through the divorce process, and help you move through it with more resilience, with more grace, with more calm and peace of mind to help you get through those ups and downs of emotions and triggers and all the messiness, and be able to just feel so supported and loved through it. She helps women do just that. And she's such an incredible resource for really understanding what's happening during this process and how you can very simply, within just 2 minutes, completely change how you're showing up in the mediation meeting, in the tough conversations, in the tough text messages. So absolutely, this is a must listen. If you are going through this process, concerned that you may be going through, a separation or divorce soon, absolutely, this is going to be one that you want to check out. Olivia, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah. So to start off, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your story and how you got into supporting women somatically through divorce.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just dive in, but feel free to jump in at any point. So I spent the better part of my adult life in corporate marketing, which I always knew there was something different that I was supposed to be doing. Little did I know that it would actually end up being supporting women through divorce from a somatic perspective. And why I chose to do that was sort of a trifecta of things that happened to me in my late 40s when we're going through a bunch of hormonal changes. In fact, I started going into perimenopause in my early 40s, which was much sooner than most of my community. And even though that was just 10 years ago, there wasn't a lot of information out there about it at the time, oddly. And now I feel like, thankfully, there's so much more awareness about it. As I started to experience changes in my body, alongside of that, I started to experience changes in my marriage. And we had a really crazy story where I knew as a young child, I think I was around age 4 when I said this to my mom, that I was going to meet the man I was going to marry in Paris. I didn't even know what that meant, but just intuitively, I knew that there was some type of connection to meeting my now ex-husband and the city of Paris. And so lo and behold, that's actually what happened.
Wow.
We were together for 24 years. So dating for 5, married for almost 20 before we decided to get divorced. And I think, what I experienced in my divorce process, going back to the trifecta. So actually, there were 4 things. I was experiencing hormonal changes. I had recently lost my job due to layoffs at the company I was with at the time. Because of my unemployment, and at the time, my ex-husband had been also laid off from his job, we had to sell our house. So we were selling the childhood home that our daughters had grown up in. And then we decided to get divorced. And so here I was with all of these things happening at once. And thankfully, alongside of that, as the universe would have it, I had met my now mentor, who's also your mentor, who teaches breathwork and somatic healing and coaching. And so I had dove into her programs alongside all of this happening. not knowing why. Well, as it would, end up being, I was meant to do all of those programs so then I could help other women moving through the divorce process from a somatic perspective.
Amazing. Wow. What a storm of things happening at once.
Yeah.
And a very big upheaval of life.
Yeah.
Honestly, is not uncommon for a lot of
Mhm.
women,
Mhm.
going into our 40s, midlife-ish, that a lot of these things are happening at the same time. With that, I think a lot of women maybe haven't even heard the word somatic or have heard it but
Mhm.
don't really understand what it is. Maybe we can
Mhm.
start there with what does that mean and why does our body need support during these kind of shifts in life?
Yeah, absolutely. So, circling back really quick to your observation around this happening to a lot of women in their 40s, I recently came across this statistic that supports that. In that, and they call it gray divorce, which I don't love because I'm about to turn 51 and I don't feel like I'm in that era of my life. But apparently, the numbers of women in gray divorce, so 50 plus, have doubled since 1990.
Mm,
And now they make up 40% of divorces in the United States. So that's pretty significant. So I just wanted
mhm.
to, validate what you just said, because if you're a listener right now and you're struggling in your relationship and you're in your 40s or in the gray zone like me, it's not uncommon. So just to share that with your audience. So, how does that then tie into somatic healing? What is that? Why do I do the work that I do? So, in the word somatic is the word soma, which means body. And there is a belief, and it's becoming more and more popular, and there's more and more awareness around it, that the experiences that we go through in life, especially something that is traumatic, actually lives at a cellular level in the body. It actually doesn't live in the mind. So, when you're able to go into the body through things like breath work, which is one of the major tools that I use in my own practice, alongside other somatic based tools, you're able to start moving that energy around. You're able to start finding what we call ruptures in our system. So, energy that's stagnant from experiences that we've gone through. And as you're able to start moving that energy through tools like breath work, what happens is your nervous system starts to regulate. And as your nervous system starts to regulate, your brain stem starts to relax. And then this really cool thing called neuroplasticity can happen, where you start to unwire the patterns and belief systems and stories that you have created in those neural pathways. And you can start to rewire them with different thoughts, different belief systems, different patterns, which is really cool.
So cool. And I feel like that's something, again, like this isn't being talked about.
Mm-mm.
Typically, especially when it comes to divorce, it's sort of treated as this legal and emotional event that is just literally is what it is. And maybe someone goes to a therapist, maybe to support
Mhm.
them, but they're
Mhm.
really not thinking about what their nervous system is doing during this and how, their body is feeling very unsafe, probably through all of it, and what they can actually do to potentially feel really good through it, or at least be able to move through, I'm sure all the emotions that come with it with maybe more
Mhm.
grace and flexibility.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really important point because what I experienced in my own separation process is that you are expected to move from an intimate relationship with the person who has been your person for the better part of your adult life. That's most of us, right? If we're getting divorced in our 40s and our 50s. And overnight, especially if you're a co parent, you are supposed to turn that into a business relationship. It's supposed to become transactional overnight, which honestly is impossible. And there is no grace in the divorce system, right? There's no grace with attorneys, there's no grace with mediators, there's no grace in the judicial process in general. And so it's really challenging to be able to make that switch, especially if you're not getting into the body and regulating your nervous system. And so that is one of the main reasons why I wanted to start focusing my practice on women moving through divorce, because I think it's so much, divorce is never easy, right? It's messy. It's painful, it's hard. But if you're able to regulate your nervous system and you're able to go into the body and find the ruptures and heal those wounds, you will be able to move through it with more grace, more ease, and more effectively than if you were just doing the traditional methods.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, and I have several friends are going through divorce now in this time of life, and one of my close friends going through it. I've really had this new insight of it through her, where she's like, between her, still husband, they're in the process still. The emotional ups and downs of like seeing him and still loving him, but then, he's doing something in a certain way. It's like there's so many, yeah, like emotions that go through it. I'm sure deep feelings that, like you said, all of a sudden it has to shift overnight, but it's not easy. And both people are going through it the best they can, but most of us aren't taught coping skills and regulation skills and all of this. So it's just so messy. Yeah. So it's beautiful that there's a process that you can go through that's better.
Yeah, yeah. I absolutely agree, and I see it with my own community as well. It's, I always talk about how the healing process isn't linear, right? You know
Mhm.
this to be true. And so even for me, who's, 2 years out from this and on the other side of it, I'll still have moments where I feel triggered. I'll still have moments where the duality exists of still caring about someone and knowing that it's no longer the right relationship. And I think that that's what so many of us go through. And then you're absolutely right. As men and women, we process things completely differently. And so a lot of times what I'm working with my clients and also my friends that are going through it is, how do you focus on yourself and your own healing journey when you don't agree with how your partner is moving through the healing journey? And again, that's where going into the body is really important rather than trying to be up here in the mind and be logical about it because you're just swimming around in those same neural pathways.
I feel like that's great for any relationship too, to keep that in mind, because we're all different, and
Mhm.
trying to do something together with a partner, especially if it's a partner that, you're no longer seeing eye to eye, that's
Yeah.
very challenging. So that's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Are there any, like, I mean, I feel like this is probably helpful for every single woman going through divorce. Are there any maybe like red flags or warning signs that someone could look at and say, okay, this is something that I need to work on or address?
So before you actually get to the idea of separating?
No, I mean, maybe when they're going through the process, maybe at any
Oh,
point
yeah.
in the process, if they're like, say the woman is listening to this and she's like, ooh, okay, this is maybe something that I need to, incorporate as part of my healing process through divorce.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Gosh, I mean, there's so many. So let me let me address some of the biggest ones that I experienced myself and that I also see quite frequently in my practice. So I think when you are feeling in shock, when we go through a rupture, even if it's something that we're choosing, oftentimes our body goes into shock. So when I was moving through the first 6 to 8 months of my separation process, I felt like I was in a spider web. I was just stuck, hanging in limbo and not able to move. And I wasn't the spider. I felt like I was the prey. I felt helpless. I had brain fog. I couldn't sleep at night. I felt like my space was foreign to me. So something that suddenly felt really comfortable no longer felt comfortable. And so I think one of the biggest benefits of doing any type of somatic experiencing and healing and coaching is to help you move out of that shock phase. So you can start to gain a calmer system. You can start to gain clarity. You can start to feel a little bit of steadiness in something that feels completely disruptive. So definitely shock. I think also emotions. If you feel like you're on an emotional roller coaster, which I absolutely did, if you feel like you are constantly triggered by something that your ex is doing, which I absolutely did, something like somatic coaching will be a huge benefit to helping you regulate your emotions. So the next time when something happens, you don't feel as triggered. The next time when something happens, you can come from a place of response versus reaction.
Beautiful. And you mentioned earlier, this is as part of your story. this tie-in of perimenopause and the hormonal shifts with, the divorce and separation. It sounds like that was a big piece. And I think, again, it's very common because these two things are happening around the same time of life. Is there maybe a deeper connection there as well that's worth talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I mentioned, when I started going through perimenopause, I didn't know what was happening. Early 40s, 41, 42, I started to see these shifts in my body. And how that showed up for me initially was through like extreme bloating, extreme like stomach distension, I think is like the best way to describe it. And then as things started to progress, I started to slowly gain weight. And then before I knew it, I woke up and I was 10 pounds heavier and then 20 pounds heavier. And then you start to layer on the hot flashes and the brain fog and the sleepless nights. And so, kind of going back to feeling stuck, what's happening is that your body is not only stuck, but it's going into survival mode. And if you don't know what's happening to you, which I didn't, oftentimes you're looking to your partner for support because they're your person, right? So I wanted my ex-husband to lean in and, bless his heart, he started to lean out because men don't know how to deal with that, right? So I believe that if I had the tools that I have today, that could have been one of the ways in which potentially our relationship could have been salvaged. Now, it wasn't just about perimenopause and menopause. That wasn't the breaking point in our relationship. There were underlying things that had happened to me in childhood that I was pulling through. I call them fault lines. So things that we're unaware of that we bring into our adult relationships. And there were things on his side of the fence, right? It takes two people to either make a relationship work or to bring a relationship down. So I think that the what I was experiencing hormonally was another layer on top of what was already broken between us, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. I feel like it's something that I've seen on social media. I mean, sometimes like joking and, pointing a finger at things, but that it's like all of a sudden women are perimenopausal and men are like, whoa, what's going on? I think that
What
is,
happened?
yeah. And it, not to even just say like, oh, women are acting bitchy all of a sudden or something like that. I'm doing air quotes for people who are listening, that it's all of a sudden she's so hard to deal with, but it's something, it's a life change that she's going through. And if someone isn't there to show up for you through any life change, I feel like that could be a huge divide where they're like, I'm not here for this person who isn't the 20-year-old, and I feel like that's not,
Yeah.
maybe that's not the only piece. Of course, we can have different layers of like, this is hard. I don't know how to deal with it. I want to, but I can't, whatever. But I feel like that's, yeah, a very big, I don't know, tough thing to go through that could make or break it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't tell you how much I craved the support and how I felt really alone.
Mm.
Alone in my body, alone in the symptoms that I was experiencing, alone in that feeling of what's wrong with me. And I've started to feel really broken.
Mm.
And I think when you're used to being in a partnership, in a relationship where the other person is loving you unconditionally and you feel supported, to suddenly be in a relationship where you don't feel that way anymore and you're experiencing all these things, it's easy to feel like you're not worthy.
Mm.
It's easy to start feeling abandoned and to also self-abandon, right? Because you then start to think that everything's your fault. And I think that that's really common for women that are moving through these hormonal changes and divorce at the same time.
Yeah, I think there's one kind of like through line that I see in women is a story that is so false that all of us somehow believe it, that like we're inconvenient, or we should just be quiet and helpful and support everyone else, but we shouldn't be the center of attention. We shouldn't be, really asking for help or receiving help, even through some of the toughest things in our life, like being a mom and, having babies. We're like, oh, I don't want to be an inconvenience. So I feel like that too can be something that makes it so hard to go through this, because we're like, I need help. I
Yeah.
feel so, like you mentioned, like lost and alone in my own body. and I need support. And all of a sudden, it's like we are in this place where we don't even know how to ask for it. We feel maybe guilty for even
Mhm.
experiencing these things, even though it's absolutely not our fault. So that's so hard.
It is, and I think so much plays into that, and I don't know if you see it in your own practice or with your friends, but I do think that there's also another cultural layer added on to all of this with the roles between men and women, especially in my generation. Like, I have learned so much about how I was in survival mode for so much of my marriage, and it wasn't conscious to me. I don't think it was conscious to my now ex-husband. But what that did was really just keep me at this, high level of cortisol constantly. And when I look back, I think I probably wasn't in my feminine a lot of the time. I
Mm,
was in my masculine.
mhm,
And maybe the ways that I was asking for help weren't resonating with him, or maybe I wasn't asking for help really in the ways that I needed it. And it's always like hindsight is 2020, right? We wish
mhm,
that we would have known these things as we were moving through the process, but you're right. It's there's so many things that are coming into this, and it's oftentimes as women we're so used to juggling all the things all the time that we either don't know how to ask for help, or we forget to ask for help.
mhm. Yeah. And you touch on, the feminine and masculine. How would you describe those again to some maybe someone who's like, well, yeah, girl and boy, like, but
Right?
beyond that, like what is our maybe like feminine energy and more masculine energy?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think when women are in their divine feminine, we are in this place of creation, right? We are the creators. We birth things into reality, whether it's babies or homes or careers or all of the above. We are meant to not only birth things, but we're meant to receive. And so I think when we are in our most divinely feminine place, that is how we're feeling. We're feeling free. We're feeling in creation mode. We're feeling in receivership.
Mhm.
And, men, when they're in their divine masculine, they are that stabilizing frequency, right? They're the ones that are saying, like, I've got you, I've got us, I'm not going to let us fall. And I think oftentimes today in our society, women have gone to the other end of the spectrum, and it's no one's fault, right? But I think, if you kind of look back historically in time, we went from a place of being completely suppressed, right? And not having a voice or a say to then swinging to the other end of the spectrum with like the feminist movement. And along that, I think that men kind of lost their way, understandably, right? So then they're
Mhm.
looking at themselves and saying, well, what's my role, right? And we live in a community now in a culture where, most households are dual income. And so I think it's hard for us to figure out like what are our roles and how do we work together without me and, women losing their divine feminine and then men, being in their divine masculine.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, beautifully said. Yeah, I agree. I think it's like all the empowerment of women is of course wonderful. But yeah,
Yeah.
I was like, okay, but do it like a man. Like do, the masculine way of doing life. If you're going to have a business and kids, like do it in that form and do it all the time and consistent output and productivity and all of that when in reality the divine feminine is so, cyclical. We're cyclical
Yeah.
beings and we like come and go with things and we just
Mhm.
do things in a more like flexible yet decisive way. And so I think that's a beautiful thing to touch on that even, through this change in our relationship with this partner, being aware of those, two pieces of all of us,
Mhm.
I can do it
Yeah,
all. Yeah.
absolutely.
And you mentioned earlier those fault lines. I love that term for it. Can you tell us more about the fault lines and, what those are, how they show up?
Yeah. So this really became very obvious to me through my divorce process. And it's because of all the things that we know and all of the training and the coaching that I've been through, where we talk a lot about inner childhood wounds in somatic practices. And what that means is that the experiences that we go through in our childhood years, particularly from ages 0 to 7, often create ruptures in our system that aren't healed. And so then we develop protectors to help us cope with life. And so little did we know, especially if you were in my generation, that these things were happening to us, right? And it's not only 0 to 7, it can also happen in our teenage years and young adulthood. And so when I started to think back on my 50-year journey and the inner childhood wounds that I experienced, and as I started to move through my separation and divorce process, I thought, oh my God, right? Look at that wound of abandonment that I experienced from my father now showing up in how I feel about getting separated and divorced from my husband. Ooh, look at that wound around I'm not enough. I'm not worthy. This person doesn't want to be with me anymore. Well, where did that show up? In my childhood. And so I call them fault lines because we're walking around with these things underneath the surface that we don't even know about. And then they end up showing up in our adult relationships and oftentimes will bring down a marriage. And they're happening on both sides of the fence. It's never one person and their own fault lines. That I'm starting to write a memoir about this. And the working title is Fault Lines, a story of love, loss, and the childhood patterns that shape us. Because I think it's really important to bring that, to the surface and to bring awareness around it. And it's something that I work on frequently with my clients in my practice.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so many of us start to identify these in this time of life too. At least that's been my experience. My friends, again, maybe we're doing therapy. We're finally realizing there's an issue. And it's all these things that go so far back into our childhood. And one thing that I've found really interesting about this is that, I think there's a misconception that it's like trauma, like this traumatic event. It has to be some big thing, like,
Right.
your parents left you and like physically truly abandoned you. In reality, like we can have that abandonment wound, for example, and it was like nothing actually happened. It was maybe just our parents not showing up the way that we wanted or needed. And we felt abandoned, or, our friend stopped being friends with us, which is something that's so common, like, happens. But we can internalize that and create a story around it. And next thing you know, we're like, oh, not someone who's worthy of love. I'm not someone who, people want to stick around for. And it didn't have to be something, dramatic and huge, but it still could have this really dramatic way in how we see ourselves deep down and the core beliefs that we have.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you brought that up because you're right. It could be something that as we look back on our childhood feels now insignificant, but it left an imprint. And when you mentioned friends, that was absolutely me. Like I, as most kids do in junior high and high school, wanted to have friends. I wanted to be popular, especially I'm going to age myself. But, this was in the 80s, like late 80s, early 90s that I was moving through those years. And so and this is going to sound silly, but I think so many women can resonate with this. I remember that I had a best friend for, 8th, 9th, and 10th grade. And she was like my ride or die, and we did everything together. And then one day she decided that she was going to be best friends with someone else. And it broke my heart. And to this day, I think it left an imprint around not being enough, right? Not being enough in our friendships, not being enough in romantic relationships. So you're right. Even things that, weren't dramatic or super traumatic will leave an imprint at a cellular level. So again, going back into the body, it's not up here, it's actually in here.
Yeah. And how do those things usually show up? Is it like being triggered by something? Maybe how can someone start to explore those and, get curious about those and start to heal them?
Yeah. Ooh. Yes. So I think as you're moving through the divorce process, I think a lot of times the triggers will show up in how your ex-partner is showing up or how they're behaving through the process. So I'm trying to think of like a recent example of something that I experienced myself, which will hopefully help, kind of articulate this to your listeners. So I am so grateful that my daughters are surrounded by 3 sets of very loving grandparents. And my daughters were recently invited to a trip over a holiday, which is the first time that this has happened because my ex-husband and I share the holidays. And when I found out about the trip, and it wasn't purposeful, but it was presented to my daughters before I had been asked if that was okay.
Mm.
And immediately when I found out about this, I went into this place of just like not only being triggered, right? So for me, I feel that in my gut. Like anytime something is triggering for me, it just lands somatically in the lower half of my body. And as I sat there and, oftentimes what I'll do with myself or with clients is I'll really just allow myself to drop my awareness into that part of my body where I'm feeling the contraction or the sensation. And as I started to kind of just bring my awareness and ask what was really underneath that feeling, it was once again the abandonment wound,
Mm.
right? So I was correlating, my daughters being taken on an amazing trip with their family who loves them to me being abandoned over the holidays, right? So I think, when you feel a trigger, it's just bringing awareness from your mind into the place of your body where you feel that, and then looking under the hood, like what's underneath that. So hopefully that's helpful because the trigger really isn't oftentimes about what's happening at a surface level. It's about what's
Mhm.
head.
Mhm. So kind of getting curious of like, oh, like why does that bother me so much?
Yeah.
Going down into the body and seeing
Yeah.
where you kind of feel contraction or,
Mhm.
some sort of sensation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Maybe for the person to like kind of go maybe a little bit deeper into somatic work
Yeah.
and, breath work and things like that. Maybe where's the starting point for someone who maybe is like frozen, stuck in fight or
Mhm.
flight, really
Mhm.
feeling dysregulated, and they're coming to you to start this process. Where do you start? Is it something like some big dramatic thing that they're doing, or kind of where's the starting point there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I work with clients in many different ways. And oftentimes, as a starting point, what I recommend is doing a 4-week reset together so you can get to experience the work and determine if it's the right fit for you. And oftentimes, why I like to do a 4-week program together is because it gives us the chance to actually start to regulate your nervous system. As with most things, that doesn't happen overnight.
Mhm.
But what I know to be true from my own journey and what I see with my clients is after the first session, you're going to feel better than you did walking into that session. And in my first 4 sessions, what we're doing, and you touched on this earlier, is
Mm.
finding safety in the body. So it's a lot of breath work. It's a lot of finding safety in our environment, finding safety in our bodies, finding safety in relationship. And so we're gently exploring and building the foundation together. And then if it's something that resonates with you, what we do from there is move into a 3 to 6 month coaching program where we're meeting ideally every week to continue the work and diving deeper into all the things that we've been talking about.
Mhm.
The inner childhood wounds, the triggers, like where are you feeling the ruptures? How could something that happened to you in high school actually be, tied to what you're experiencing in your separation and divorce? And so that's when we move into the deeper work. But the first 4 weeks are about finding safety
Mhm.
and regulating the nervous system. And we do it all over Zoom. So it doesn't even have to be in person. You don't have to be in San Diego to work with me. I work with clients all over the United States.
Beautiful. That sounds amazing. Like a way to, I mean, I feel like in my own body, I know that I have to be regulated to even be able to start to explore. If I'm dysregulated, it's like, but it's almost like the voices in your head, that sounds like, not crazy voices, but like, the inner voice that's
Oh,
saying,
yeah.
you're not good enough, but you're not good enough. No one loves you. They can
Hmm.
get so loud and feel like such truth that it's so hard to be like, what is that? Like, where is this coming from? You're like, no, you're just terrible. And so I feel like that's so helpful to be able to calm that down and come to a place of just calm safety to then be able to explore. Okay. And especially I'm sure if it's a recent divorce and those things are so raw to feel so vulnerable, it must be really scary to the body and the mind to go deeper and like, well, let me look at other things that have, gone wrong in my life. So I feel like that's a beautiful way to go through it and have your kind of support to explore that rather than just like them trying to figure it out on their own and not really knowing what do I do? What's the right approach to this? What's, maybe too strong at a certain point. That's beautiful.
Yeah. And you touched on a few things that I think are worth diving into a little bit deeper. So, one, for anybody that's listening out there that's moving through this, if your brain feels like scrambled eggs, that's normal,
Mm.
right? I oftentimes felt like I was crazy, just like what you said before. It was like my mind was a scramble of all the things that I was feeling and experiencing. And so you're absolutely right. In order to calm the mind and to not experience that scrambled egg type of feeling, we have to regulate our nervous system. Absolutely. And then, as we do the deeper work together, my job and what is so different than talk therapy or mindset coaching is I'm attuned to you the entire time. My job is to be embodied for the full hour that we're together, and I'm tracking your system. So you're actually guiding the session. And we're titrating it based on how you're feeling. So if something feels too scary or too deep or something that you don't want to touch, then we back right off of it. So I think oftentimes when I start to work with clients too, they see that they're in control and I'm simply the guide.
Hmm. Oh, that's lovely. Yeah. Again, I think a lot of people, I think, have a lot of fear of, even therapy or,
Mhm.
somatic work going deeper into those areas of like, oh, I don't want it to make me feel worse because in the past, maybe we've like when we do think about that, we don't have the tools to actually work through it and it just makes us
Mhm.
feel worse.
Mm.
And that's really beautiful to be able to have that that sovereignty and that control over it while having guidance and really, knowing that you're doing it right, which I've learned through experience, there's no like really right or wrong way.
Oh.
But when I started getting to breath work, I was like, I don't know how to do this. Am I doing it right? There's a lot of, discomfort or,
Yeah.
being very unsure about what should happen. So yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
And thank you for naming that. There's no right or wrong, right? And everyone's experience is different. And I've had clients who come in and say, I want to work on this. And this is a trigger that came up for me today. And we might just drop into 45 minutes of breath work. And then all of a sudden they're like, gosh, I feel so much better. I feel like I'm not even having that thought anymore. I'm not, experiencing that sensation. So something as foundational as breath work has the ability to make you feel so much better because also once you drop out of your mind and into your body, as you know, then you forget about, am I doing this right? How do I look on camera? Am I going to feel any better? The mind really does start to quiet down.
Yeah, it's so incredible to me because I'm a doctor. I'm very logical. I'm always have to use my brain. That's what guides me.
Yeah.
And, this year with doing more breath work and doing some more somatic work, I'm like, wow, my wisdom does not come from my brain. My brain is crazy. Like it'll just drop in all these crazy thoughts
Worse.
and it makes things actually so much more complicated where when you
Hmm.
drop into the body, it's like, boom, clear. Like it is that decisive, clear answer that there's no question about. And it's so cool when even just doing some breath work, being able to go to that place. It's really amazing how the conversation you thought you were having or the question you thought you had doesn't even exist anymore. You're like, that
Right?
and doesn't even need to be addressed at all. That's just silliness that my brain was coming up with. So
Yeah.
very cool.
Yeah, absolutely. The body holds all the wisdom. We can't hear it half the time because our brain's in overdrive, right?
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. And with that, I mean, maybe to like just touch on real quickly what breathwork is too. Because again, I
Yeah.
think that's one where people are like, oh, Wim Hof, this is some crazy,
Oh, no.
intense
Yeah.
breathing or something. Just to touch on that for people.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up because I
Mhm.
think now that breath work is starting to gain more awareness, people know who Wim Hof is, or they'll look him up and they'll think that that's what breath work is. And for some people, that works. I've done it myself. And if your system is regulated already, I think that that type of breath style that's more activating can work. But what's important to name for anyone doing any type of breath work is that there's not just that activating style of breath. Oftentimes with my client, we are using very much so something that down regulates the nervous system, right? So something as simple as in through the nose and out through the mouth. And that sounds so simple, but if you do 30 minutes of that, you're going to feel completely different, right? And so I think if you are doing breath work right now with any practitioner, the most important thing is that you are in control of the breath work style. So again, oftentimes I'm using that in my practice. Other times I will use an activating breath, if that's something that my client is looking for and they feel regulated. I'll also use a breathwork style that if people are familiar with Kundalini yoga is called breath of fire. And that, 3 minutes of that, it really clears out your system. It's just basically, breathing through your stomach. And it's all nose breath. So the style is always dependent on how you are coming into the session and what your body needs at the time. So really important to remember for anyone out there doing breath work, it's not about adhering to the style that's being presented. It's about what your body needs in that moment and choosing the right breathwork style.
Yeah, that's great for people to hear, I think. Again, it doesn't have to be this big, intimidating thing that it's just meeting yourself where you are. And another thing that I found really interesting getting to breath work is that even very gentle, just awareness around breathing, even not controlling it, that alone, within like a minute, you can notice a shift because I think oftentimes we are stuck in fight or flight a lot of the time and we're not actually breathing the way that we should. We're breathing up in our chest and breathing more quickly. And that if we just slow down for a little bit, that even that can have a profound shift. So it doesn't have to be like, the more aggressive it is, the more, result that you find too.
Absolutely. I tell clients all the time. And in fact, I recently did a post about this, going back to our conversation around how you're expected to move from an intimate relationship with your person into a business transaction. And then, especially if you're a co-parent, you're immediately going into discussions around the co-parenting plan and how you're going to divide time. And all of those things can be super triggering. If you have the ability to take 2 minutes and do 10 rounds of breath in through the nose and out through the mouth with an exhale that's longer than the inhale, you will feel better, right? 2 minutes, 10 breaths. I even told a client recently, like if you're walking into mediation, like pop into the bathroom and sit on the stall and do that for 2 minutes. You'll feel so much better walking into that meeting than you did before you took those 2 minutes for yourself.
Amazing. Wow. What a great, quick actionable tip for people to take and just be able to do, just breathe for a couple minutes before that. That's incredible. And just being able to come from then maybe a more grounded, regulated place that it's still maybe not going to be easy, tough
Of
process,
course.
but then at least you're, in a better state for those tough experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't have to be, 30 minutes to an hour. It can be 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Just to take that initial, to your point, if you're stressed, you often don't realize oh, you're holding it all here, right? We're in a contraction. So even just those 10 breaths, helps open this up and helps us bring all of our energy from out here into here. So you're feeling more grounded and more centered.
Amazing. This has been so incredibly beautiful and helpful. I would love to know, is there maybe one more piece that you'd love to leave the listener with? Maybe a message for women going through this?
Oh gosh, there is so much light and life and love on the other side of this. And whenever you're feeling like there's not, just go into your heart space. Again, even if it's just for 2 minutes, and drop your awareness from your mind into your heart and just send breath into that space and know that you are loved. Know that you are supported and know that you are being guided to a place of alignment. Because I think so often when we're going through such transition, such a transformative time in our lives, it's so easy to say this is happening to me. But if you can reframe it to this is happening for me, that changes everything.
Oh, beautiful. I love that reframe. Amazing. Well, thank you, Olivia, so much for being here. Where can people find
Mhm.
you if they want to work with you or learn more about what you do?
Absolutely. So I'm on Instagram at the Somatic Divorce Coach. And it's also the same for my website. So the somaticdivorcecoach.com. All my services are listed up there. You can email me directly from my website. You can certainly DM me on Instagram. I'm always happy to hear from people. And, if it's not something that interests them, in terms of the work that I do, always happy to refer to others in my community who are supporting women moving through divorce from a different perspective. So I just love connecting and hearing stories and seeing if I can be of service and if I can be of help. So don't be shy to reach out.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Miranda. So good.